Chairman Guth, we are now live and you have the floor.
Thank you. I am Chairman Brad Guth of the Pitt County Planning Board, and I'd like to welcome everybody to the March 17th, 2021 Planning Board meeting. So we'll call that to order. And if I could ask Ms. Otten, if you would call the roll, please.
Fred Austin.
Present.
Faye Barefoot.
Present.
Don Brown.
Here.
Naomi Buck.
Here.
David Davenport.
Here.
Brad Guth.
Here.
RJ Hemby.
Here.
Steve Little.
Here.
Tucker Moore.
Here.
Maria Rogerson.
Here.
And Mr. Chairman, we received notice that Mr. Landry would not be able to attend tonight.
Okay, thank you very much. I believe we have a quorum for our business this evening. So let's move to the next item on our agenda, which is our prayer. If everybody will bow their heads with me, please. We'll have a moment of silence. Thank you. Now, if we could pledge allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. I believe everyone has received a copy of the minutes from our last meeting, from the February 17th meeting. If I can hear a motion to approve, or if there are any corrections that need to be made for the minutes, please state that now.
I move they be approved.
Mr. Little has made the motion. Is there a second?
Second, RJ Hemby.
Mr. RJ Hemby has seconded it. Ms. Otten, could you do roll call vote for us, please?
Yes, Fred Austin.
Here.
Faye Barefoot.
Here.
Don Brown.
Tony already did that. Here.
Naomi Buck.
Here.
David Davenport.
Approve.
Brad Guth.
Approve.
RJ Hemby.
Approve.
Steve Little.
Approved.
Tucker Moore.
Approve.
Maria Rogerson.
Approved.
Thank you, Ms. Otten. Now we have the opportunity for public addresses to the board. I believe there's a Ms. Candace Pierce that has signed up to speak during this period. Ms. Pierce?
And
Okay,
Chairman Guth, this is James Rhodes. You might just want to remind people, especially for tab's sake, to identify themselves with their address. Also, if you'll go ahead and make a determination about the speaking time, typically 3 minutes, unless it's 5 minutes for a group. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
3 minutes. Thank you. Ms. Pierce?
Yes, my name is Candy Pierce. I live at 102 Kristenberry Drive, Greenville, North Carolina. I am a supervisor to the Pitt County Soil and Water Conservation District, and that's why I'm talking now. I became interested in that commission because Greenville is becoming Pitt County is becoming so urbanized. And when it was farmed, the soil and water was much better taken care of than it does when you have subdivisions, and subdivisions need to be carefully planned, which is why you have the planning board. And I'm aware of that, and I appreciate your service. I live in a subdivision in Greenville that was officially stamped and engineered and approved by planning and built with septic systems on land that would not work for septic systems. It was so long ago that no one now attending could be guilty of anything. My father bought the house, and within a year, the septic system failed, which failed right into the Meeting House branch, which runs right behind my house. So GUC came out and put in sewer, and that cost the city and the county and the state thousands of tax dollars to bring the system to the neighborhood. Then it cost $4,500 in 1969 per house to tap onto the sewer. Everyone was required to pay for that planning and platting error except the developer. Now, all of us pay every time there is a hurricane or even if it rains hard for badly planned subdivisions, which do not account for runoff in any successful way. Detention ponds are full and overflow in most neighborhoods. This is not new news. I'm asking that you try as a volunteer board to make sure you read the Technical Review Board report on all subdivision plans and plats, and that you make sure they are written in such a way that your volunteer board can understand them. When I ran for this board, James Rhodes asked me if I was teachable. And knowing me a long time, he wondered, and that's probably a legitimate wonder. And I am teachable, but I've read the Technical Review Board reports, and some of them look a little bit boilerplate. I didn't understand them, even if I was supposed to know how to do it. So as a board, if you see a plat for a subdivision that you would not live in because you think the septic system might fail, then please make sure the developer creates a subdivision that will control runoff for decades. Thank you for your volunteer service to this county. And thank you for allowing me to speak.
Thank you, Ms. Pierce. Appreciate your comments. I believe Ms. Pierce was the only speaker that we had sign up to address the board at this point in the meeting. So I think we'll move to the rezoning request that we have, and I believe Mr. Rogers is going to present those.
Yes, sir. Good evening, everybody. Let me share my screen. Can everybody see that?
Yes, sir.
Yes. Right. Thank you. All right, we do have one rezoning request this evening. It was submitted by Mr. Julian Charez for approximately 2.10 acres of his property. This is located on the northern side of Ramshorn Road. This is parcel numbers 41811 and 86017. And the request is to rezone the properties from RR, which is rural residential, to the rural agricultural district with a conditional district with it for a lawn care and landscape business. Little site data for you. As you see on this vicinity map, the property is located again on Ramshorn Road, which is just north of US 264 East and just northeast of Greenville and its ETJ. Here are a few site pictures of the property. You will notice that there has been some land disturbance activity, and I do want to provide a little bit of brief background on this. When staff went to post a rezoning sign and to get site pictures of the property, we did observe that there was some land disturbing activity on the site. We immediately talked to the applicant and property owner and let him know that that should not be taking place until this rezoning process has been complete and that all proper permits have been issued. At that time, we did request that he cease all activity until this process has been completed, as well as install stability measures to kind of make sure that all the soil erosion was not leaving the site. The applicant has installed silt fencing since that time, and again has ceased activity on there until this process has been completed. So here's some material for the business as well as a structure that has been moved to the property. Again, we requested that this cease until this process has been completed and all permits have been issued. This is the view to the west, or excuse me, to the east, looking down Ramshorn Road, and the view to the west. A few adjacent properties. This picture and this one are both residences directly across the street from the site, as well as this residence directly to the west. And this is property directly to the north, and this is agricultural land. The future land use map does designate this property as suburban residential along with this entire area on Ramshorn Road. The suburban residential designation is intended to include residential land uses, including single family and manufactured home subdivisions and manufactured parks, as well as limited multifamily, commercial, office, light industrial, and public institutional uses meeting locational criteria. This locational criteria includes frontage and access to a major state highway or secondary road, or location at a major intersection, proximity to similar uses, and spatial separation from non-compatible uses such as residential uses. Land designated as suburban residential is distinguished by the greater potential for development and the inclusion of a broader range of land uses. The existing land uses in the area, you see a majority of it is that orange color, which is existing residential. There's also some agricultural and undeveloped land in the area. The zoning map for the area, you'll notice that all the properties north of Ramshorn Road, they're all zoned rural residential. Just south of Ramshorn Road, directly across the street from the subject properties, is all zoned rural agricultural. So Ramshorn Road was kind of one of the areas designated to kind of separate these two zoning districts when the zoning map was created. The RA district is primarily intended to accommodate very low density residential uses, as well as associated public and institutional uses, low intensity commercial uses, and agricultural related industrial uses, which are interspersed throughout areas that are principally characterized as rural in nature. The district reflects the diverse nature of land uses within predominantly rural areas and therefore permits a wide array of land uses. However, those intensive land uses which could have an adverse impact on the rural nature are not permitted or allowed on a case-by-case basis following a formal review and approval process. A conditional zoning district allows for the approval of a proposal for a specific use with reasonable conditions to assure the compatibility of the proposed use with the use and enjoyment of neighboring properties. And again, the proposed use is a lawn care and landscape business, and it's Julian's Lawn and Landscape. As part of this process, the applicant is required to submit a conceptual sketch plan. And before I get into that, included in your agenda packet was a business plan submitted by the applicant, and I did want to specify a few notes he included on that. So the site will include a patio yard, equipment storage areas, a workshop, employee and company vehicle parking, and it's mainly going to be used to store materials for the business such as mulch, rock, soils, plants, and hardscape materials. The structure that was brought to the property did have plumbing removed, and the applicant proposes temporarily rent porta johns. And also included in the business plan, the material storage areas will be fenced with shrubbery and trees bordering the outside of the fence, except for the plant storage area. So you'll see this conceptual site plan. The red line there shows the property that is proposed for rezoning. This dark gray dash line is the proposed fence on the property. Two structures are proposed for the property. You'll see those there. The yellow areas designate different storage areas. You'll see to the northwest, that is plant storage proposed area. There's also patio yard storage, pallet storage, the rock and mulch, as well as equipment storage. The driveway and proposed parking area for employees. There is some existing vegetation along Ramshorn Road. The applicant has also on the site plan, conceptual site plan, shown other potential or proposed, vegetation along Ramshorn Road. And I will get into this in just a second, but staff will also be proposing and requiring that the other areas of the storage area be screened where there is not existing natural vegetation. Two gates are proposed on the property, with the driveway again going to Ramshorn Road. Planning staff does find that this request is consistent with the Pitt County Comprehensive Land Use Plan, given the subject's property's designation as suburban residential on the future land use map, and it meets locational criteria for the suburban residential land use category. Planning staff also finds that this request is reasonable and in the public interest because the properties directly across the road from the subject properties are currently zoned RA. Staff does recommend approval of this request for 2.10 acres, again located on the northern side of Ramshorn Road. Parcel numbers 41811 and 86017 from RR to Rural Agricultural Conditional District to operate a lawn care and landscape business, with the following additional conditions: that no zoning compliance permit shall be issued until the site plan prepared in accordance with Appendix B of the zoning ordinance be submitted to the Pitt County Planning Department for review and approval. That all outside storage areas shall only be used for storage of equipment and material for the proposed use, Julian's Lawn and Landscape. That a landscape plan is required for any outside storage areas, and that it be screened 10 foot wide around the storage area per section 10H of the zoning ordinance. and that required parking spaces, access drives, and loading areas shall be paved and maintained with concrete, asphalt, or similar material of sufficient weight and thickness and consistency to support anticipated traffic volumes and weights. That a soil erosion and sedimentation control plan approved by an engineer be submitted for development of this property that results in land disturbance of 1 acre or more. That plan will be reviewed by the TRC and ensure that all potential issues are addressed, and the property must be in compliance prior to the zoning compliance permit being issued. The site must also comply with the Pitt County Stormwater Ordinance for nutrient control. Nutrient loading and peak flow calculations shall be reviewed and approved prior to any improvements involving more than 1/2 acre. To obtain all required permits from Pitt County inspections to occupy the existing structures and any proposed structures, as well comply with all applicable environmental health requirements for wastewater disposal. And finally, to obtain a driveway permit from NCDOT and comply with all requirements for access to the subject property. So public comments will now be entertained by the planning board. The planning board will then make a recommendation to the Board of Commissioners, who will currently schedule to hold a public hearing at their April 19th, 2021 meeting. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I will turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. Are there any questions from the planning board on Mr. Rogers' presentation? The staff is recommending that this be approved with additional conditions. So are there any questions about that recommendation or the additional conditions from the planning board?
Hey, Ben, just a question.
Yes, sir.
Were there any comments from any of the neighbors?
I did have a comment. We had a phone call from an adjacent property owner once some of that activity took place. And she was concerned that it was going to be an eyesore. I explained to her that, you know, we asked the applicant to kind of pause all activity until we get through this process, and that there will be some screening requirements. She was happy to hear that. So she was just kind of curious what was going to go there. But mainly that it was going to be an eyesore. And I explained, based on the conceptual site plan, there was proposed screening, but that planning staff will also require a buffer yard around the storage area. And she was excited to hear that. So that kind of took care of her comment.
Good deal. I was just wondering, I saw the list of neighbors and just wanted to see if anybody did comment. So,
yes, sir. That was the one we got.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Little. Are there any other questions from the planning board? If not, is the applicant, or is there anybody here in the meeting that wants to speak? Or
So I do have a question.
okay,
Do they have any proposals for storing any heavy equipment, forklifts or backhoes or anything like that related to their business? Are they going to store them there on the property as well?
The conceptual site plan did show that there was an area for equipment storage, and I believe the applicant, Mr. Julian's on, if he doesn't mind unmuting himself, if you don't mind addressing that. Mr. Julian, are you still online?
we can see you, Mr. Julian, but you need to unmute there you go.
There you go. Okay. Can you guys hear now? Yes. Thank you very much. I was listening to everything you guys said. And yes, about the equipment, I do have a wood chipper, also a bobcat. It's going to be like trailers. Basically, most likely, like it's 2 skid steers that will be around. Besides that, I don't think I have anything bigger like a backhoe or excavator or anything like that. It's most likely it's going to be like lawnmowers and small equipment. But that's kind of like on the center of the land where I have the shop. If it is any noise inconvenience, I put it somewhere around the middle of the property because I don't want to disturb any of the people around, you know.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Julian, would you like to say anything else about the request?
I would like to say that, you know, I would like to have a, you know, I would love to have approval from you guys. I've been running my business and it's located on on my house, and that's why I was kind of looking to put my stuff somewhere else, and as he's following Mr. Ben's Ryer's instructions, and I'm not doing anything down there anymore, and really need to have a place for my business to keep moving, and put my basically my materials and my trucks, just to have a place to welcome my employees and send them out to work.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Anybody else that would like to comment on this rezoning request?
No, sir.
All right, well, let's.
Brad, I've got a question.
Okay, yes, sir, Mr. Moore.
What's going to be done about all the stuff that's already been done on this piece of property without, the proper soil and erosion stuff?
So once we realized that activity had taken place, Thomas Schrader with our office did send a violation letter since that land had been disturbed. And Mr. Julian came in and met with staff just to make sure we were all on the same page. But that letter was sent just to begin the process and have that paper trail. Like I said, it was agreed upon at that time to kind of stop all activity, to install that silt fencing at the bottom of the berm that had been installed along the road, so that everything for the time being was kept on site. As a part of this process, and one of those conditions was that the soil erosion plan be submitted. That will have to be prepared by an engineer, and we'll go to our TRC for approval. So these are some of the things that are going to have to happen to kind of get the property in compliance once this rezoning process is done and prior to the zoning permit being issued, taking care of all that activity that has taken place to make sure it is in compliance before moving forward with other permits.
My concern is, this just already looks like it's going to be an eyesore. And are we going to start drawing a line in the county at some point? Because I'll drive through Pitt County and it looks like a third world country sometimes. I just wonder with people sketching things. Are we ever going to have any more stuff in the county that is built properly?
I think that's just an enforcement point of view, and we need to, as we realize these things and realize that happened is when we took the enforcement action with the letter. James or Eric, do you want to expand upon that?
I'll just say, Mr. Moore, again, this is a large county. When we become aware of some violations, we take action. We're not necessarily looking to fine or penalize anybody. We just are seeking compliance. And at this point in time, Mr. Charles is moving forward. He's made some efforts to gain compliance, put up silt fencing. This is not the best time of year. We're getting into the time of year where it's better to actually establish vegetation on site. He is a landscaper. I'm hopeful that he continues his progression in getting it fully in compliance. But right now he's still under violation, and we're going to ensure that he gains compliance or the zoning permit can't be released. That's the best we can do right now.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Are there any other questions? Okay, well, I will certainly entertain a motion on the staff's recommendation to approve with additional conditions.
Motion to approve.
Second the motion.
I think that was Ms. Barefoot, and then I think
Right.
Mr. Little seconded it. So if Ms. Otten would do a roll call vote for us for this.
Fred Austin,
Approved.
Dave Barefoot,
Approved.
Don Brown,
Approved.
Naomi Buck,
Approved.
David Davenport,
Approve.
Brad Guth,
Approved.
RJ Hemby,
Approve.
Steve Little,
Approved.
Tucker Moore. Tucker Moore,
Your volume's off, Tucker.
Nay.
Maria Rogerson.
Approved.
All right. Thank you very much. We can move to our next item on the agenda, which is our development review. And Mr. Bryant, I believe, is going to present those.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and Planning Board. First up for development review, Cheek Farm preliminary plan. We received a letter this afternoon from Baldwin Design Consultants in reference to Cheek Farm preliminary plat requesting a continuance. On behalf of our client, I would like to continue this plan until such a time when the Abbott Farm project can resolve the driveway issues. These projects are tied together and would present a development issue if not simultaneously considered before the board. Please contact me if you have any questions concerning this request. Sincerely, Mike Baldwin.
So now we need to decide as a board whether to accept the continuance. Is that correct, Mr. Jordan Smith?
I'm on.
Sorry, I had to unmute myself, Mr. Chairman.
No worries.
Yes, that is correct. And I will just say that the subdivision ordinance does recognize the right of an applicant to withdraw or ask for a continuance to this board.
Okay. So members of the planning board, do I hear a motion to accept this request for the continuance of the preliminary plan review?
So moved.
Well, second, Don Brown.
This is
Mr.
Maria.
Little?
I had a quick question. If we approve to continue, is it just continuing it to the next meeting, or does he pick what meeting?
That's a good question. I'm see that he's identified any particular meeting.
Mr. Chairman and Jordan, maybe you have some better insight on this, but looking in the subdivision ordinance, there is no outline of time. Maybe it would go back to the time, the maximum amount of time a plan could be considered, but there is no time restriction on that.
Okay, so it's just open-ended.
So it could be just indefinite.
Yeah, and Mr. Chair, this is James. I would say it may behoove the board to consider that. You may want to give a time limitation. Certainly when we dealt with it last month, this is the second continuance. We gave it 1 month. I would recommend that you consider adding a time period to it. You wouldn't necessarily want it just lying out there until an indefinite period of time. So maybe just 1 month, maybe up to 3 months would be my recommendation.
In my motion, can I change it, Mr. Chairman, to move that we continue this till our May meeting?
All right. Mr. Little has amended his motion to include a time limit of May. Do I hear a second to the amended motion?
Second.
I believe Ms. Barefoot seconded that motion, and Ms. Otten, if you will take a roll call vote, please.
You have to do it.
Fred Austin,
Approve the continuance.
Faye Barefoot,
Approve.
Don Brown,
Approve.
Naomi Buck,
Approve.
David Davenport,
Approve.
Brad Guth,
Approve.
RJ Hemby,
Approve.
Steve Little,
Approved.
Tucker Moore,
Approve.
Maria Rogerson.
Approved.
Right. Well, we'll see the Cheek Farm review back on the agenda in May, if not before. And the next item on our agenda is the Tucker Hill Farm Mr. Bryant?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Up next is Tucker Hill Farm preliminary plan. This plan is located on Tucker Road, north of its intersection with Simpson Street in the Grimesland Township. This is in the Simpson ETJ, sold to agricultural residential, consisting of 55 lots, 42.7 acres. The owner is Susan Arden Tucker Hatcher. This is to give you some idea where this is located. This is the city limits in pink. The ETJ does expand out from there. This is the overall plan. With the better view here, I do want to note there are some protected features. There are 404 wetlands, drainage areas, including riparian buffers. There are some that they have added along the cul-de-sac of Lock Court. The riparian buffer on your left and your right are already existing. Site again is zoned agricultural residential with the minimum 25,000 square foot lot size in Simpson's ETJ. 2 new streets are proposed, Tucker Hill Drive and Lock Court. Electricity to be provided by Greenville Utilities Commission. Water services provided by Eastern Pines Water Corporation. Tucker Road is listed to be resurfaced in 2021. I do want to point that out as traffic is a consideration. Pitt County plan, the conditions and requirements on this plan. Open space is required, 1.65 acres. Landscape buffer will be required along Tucker Road. This project will require 401 and 404 permits from the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality if the wetlands shown are to be affected. Pitt County Environmental Health will require all septic systems to be approved. North Carolina Department of Transportation add statement to notes, this development is listed as private and will not be eligible for NCDOT maintenance. Should future consideration include a request for NCDOT maintenance, subdivision will be required to be replatted as public and all utilities will have to conform to General Statute 136.102.6. All intersections must have a 25 by 25 area as a right-of-way or public utility easement. Greenville Utilities Commission, Electric approves this plan. Eastern Pines Water Corporation will supply water to this subdivision. Pitt County Schools, Wintergreen Elementary School, Code Middle School, and DH Conley. Pitt County Emergency Management approves this plan. From the Village of Simpson, the mayor asked to share his thoughts. I have no concerns with the actual development, just Tucker Road. Our greatest concern is Tucker Road in both directions. The increased traffic flow turning left on NC 33 is a disaster waiting to happen. High speeds already make it a tough challenge to pull out on NC 33. In the opposite direction, the intersection of Tucker Road and McDonald Street is a very tricky intersection in both the morning and evening work traffic. There has been no update on the proposed roundabout. Moving further down Tucker Road, right before and after Simpson Line, the road is absolutely terrible through to Abbey Road. I appreciate you adding these comments to the planning board. And again, I do note that Tucker Road is to be resurfaced in 2021. This is a view of the site from Tucker Road. This is the adjacent property, Arden Ridge, and looking down Tucker Road, facing northwest. This is facing southwest on Tucker Road. You can see where Sherwin Downs is located, adjacent to the property. And again, this is the current site conditions. You can see Arden Ridge subdivision in the background. And another view facing Sherwin Downs. This is a view of the adjacent properties across Tucker Road. Technical Review Committee has recommended conditional approval. Adjacent property owners have been notified and staff has received a few phone calls and emails in regards to this proposed development. Comments and questions are wishing to review the plan in interest of overall design, drainage concerns for adjoining properties, wetlands, and how riparian buffers are handled. The letters that were received, the first was questions. Thanks for the information regarding the upcoming meeting for parcel number 22847. I have a few questions. What variances are requested by the developer? How tall will the new structures be? Has a traffic study been conducted? How much increase in traffic is expected? How many curb cuts, entry points into the property? Will they be on River Birch or Arden Ridge Drive? My backyard drains under Tucker Road into the ditches on that property. How will that drainage be addressed? How will the impact of story water, is likely stormwater runoff, be handled? There are low areas at the back of that property. What time may I view the preliminary subdivision plat? And note that I did send this preliminary plat to this individual. Another letter we received. Thank you very much for taking time to speak with me this afternoon. You answered many of my questions by sending a proposed map to you, and I appreciate you took time to listen to my concerns. As I told you, I'm the owner of parcel 51080, which is located directly on Tucker Road and on the north corner of the proposed subdivision. My main concern is with the ditch near the front of the subdivision that continues onto my property that my neighbor parcel 50903 then drains under the road at Arden Ridge Drive. The portion of the ditch behind my house fills to the brim during heavy rain and long wet spells, and we discussed a tree problem that I will send you a picture of. You explained that the 50-foot easement and that the water flow would not be stopped, but I think other landowners may be interested in how that would be handled. Just remain a ditch, rocks to beautify. I am also concerned about the construction traffic in and out and damage to the roads and barriers for the adjacent properties. It is not necessary to read my entire letter to the public if you are able to use some of this to answer other concerns. I appreciate the notice of the meeting, although when the orange flags went up on the property line, it was evident what was going on. I will say I will miss the beautiful farmland view, but was glad to have it for the last few years and knew it would not remain so forever. The next letter I received. I do not support the building of a new subdivision on parcel 22847 on Tucker Road in Robson for the following reasons. It will affect the drainage of the ditch that is behind my house and continues onto said parcel. This ditch already does not drain well, leaving standing water and more chances for mosquitoes and other unwanted and detrimental animals to be in the area. There will be increased people driving on Tucker Road, and an estimated 2 cars per household for 55 houses is an extra 110 cars on an old country road. This means more wear and tear on the road that is in such need of repaving. It is a horrible condition, which also is damaging my tires and alignment as well as the shocks. Tucker Road is a very small road. Also, increased number of people driving increases the chances of more accidents in the area. There will be more trash on the roads. It also increases noise pollution tremendously. Speaking of noise pollution, the building of all these houses, probably for years to come, will be a factor. It is very loud with the hammering of the trucks and the people building. Also, these loud noises will increase the anxiety of my dog. I will not be able to walk him as much, or he won't want to be in the backyard, and I will probably have to put him on anxiety medicine. A subdivision will be an eyesore. It is nice seeing land instead of houses, and often we get to see deer and many birds. This is one of the reasons we moved out here almost 18 years ago, to get away from all the subdivisions, people, and traffic. Thank you for the opportunity. Voice my concerns, Romley Rednecks. The next letter that we received. Hi, Jason. Thank you for the map. I have a few questions and official objections, and I wanted to understand what my options are. What is the minimum lot size allowed? Those lots look very small. You mentioned that Simpson doesn't have drainage laws. We actually have a Brownsland address. Does this make any difference concerning drainage rules? Where can I find details about the county drainage laws? The map is terribly inaccurate concerning the existing woodline on the property behind me. As the plat is drawn, 5 different lots touch my lot. This is a tremendous amount of septic water that appears to drain in my direction based on the elevation maps. We have been here nearly 6 years, and our septic is already strained during storms and sustained wet weather patterns. We have had the septic system serviced several times since we have moved here by Jim's Liquid Waste, and he has always said it works well, but after all the water from the field and the neighboring lots has to flow through our property, I believe firmly the lots behind me would further escalate my problem, so I would like to know how I can formally object. Thank you again for your help in this matter. David Evans. Next letter we have, I'm expressing my concern regarding the proposed subdivision on Tucker Road. There are wetlands at the end of the field, along with many deer who have nowhere to run or hide if homes are built on the field. Also, what is the minimum square footage of each home? Keep in mind that the value of the homes go up and down, or down. I know Ms. Hatcher had someone out here several years ago posting private property signs because of the concerns of deer hunting. This never happened. My biggest concern is with 55 homes, how far apart will they be? How much yard will each have? Also, how close will they back up to our yards on the right side of Arden Ridge Drive? Our neighborhood is quiet, very little trouble. There's a lot of traffic on Tucker Road, of which I was told over 2 years ago we would have a right turn lane off Highway 33, which hasn't happened yet. The vehicle traffic is unbelievable out here already, and this will add to the issues. At some point, I'm not sure there might be a need for red lights. It just seems to me that there isn't enough room for more homes, plus added people, cars, water supply, fire protection, etc. Pat Williams. At this time, do we have any questions from the board?
This is Maria. I do have a question about concerns about drainage along the property lines, and what we can do about that with the adjacent properties to both subdivisions.
And Mike, are you able to speak to that?
Any lots that are going to be any diffuse flow onto adjacent lots, you know, we can put a waterway on our side of the lot. I'm looking at lots 50, like 48 through 46, 45, 44. Some of those sheet onto the back of the lots, but that's how God made it. Where we're going to be putting the house is up toward the front yard. We can certainly get the septic tank permits for Sherwin Downs to make sure we're not doing anything that would be of adverse consequence to the existing septic systems. And over on the Arden Ridge side, more of it, it's like the Arden Ridge side drains to this subdivision. And that drainage will be gathered in the street and then carried off into the wetland area. And that's the purpose of wetlands, to filter drainage before it enters the Tar River. They're a filtering system.
Right, and I understand. I'm just more concerned about quantity.
Okay.
And I know that's dealing with quality. So.
Okay.
Yeah, that's just my concerns is trying to maintain, since I'm not sure if there's really any detention facilities being proposed that we slow that runoff down before it's going to adjacent properties and has some time for filtration.
That's right, Maria. And Simpson doesn't have a stormwater ordinance, but what we've been able to show in the past is these agricultural fields, and I've mentioned this a couple of months ago at a planning board meeting. These agricultural fields have row crops in them. The runoff coefficient is such after you have grassed yards that it is much less than what row crops are. So really, when you have grass yards, you've got in a lot of areas, unless the lot is extremely impervious, you've got lessened runoff.
And I understand where you're coming from with that, but I do know that, we're going to be adding a lot of concrete and roofs and possibly, outbuildings and things like that, which, still may be less with the additional vegetation. But yeah, if you can take a look and see if there's any property swales that would help facilitate that.
Yeah, we will,
Okay.
Maria.
I have a question. The big thing is with the addition of this many lots in this plat, and being on a septic system, what kind of impact is that going to have with all of those septic tanks concentrated in that area versus having a future outlook to sewer? And the other question related to this is with the ETJ right across the street, basically, I think that is correct from the map view that we saw. Is there plans for sewer in the ETJ? I'm sorry. Are there any future plans there that we know of? I know that's the city of Greenville.
Sir, I think the ETJ is, the Greenville's ETJ is way on down the road at the just past Rolling Meadow subdivision. So that's where it ends.
Okay.
If you're referring to Simpson's ETJ, we'd love to have sewer at this site. Our client would, but it's Simpson doesn't have anything available. There's not anything available.
Mr. Austin, this is James, and Mike is correct. Again, the property itself is within the ETJ of the village of Simpson. What the map showed was actually the village corporate limits. So this is just outside the corporate limits. Even within the corporate limits, there's not sewer service available. So sewer isn't readily available there. There is a line that runs down Highway 33. It's a force main. You may recall we had a larger subdivision that was considered Luke's Landing maybe a year or two ago, where there was authorization to tie onto that line, but the line does not run down Tucker Road. So at this point, it's not available to this property. So we've got a lot of jurisdictions kind of converging right around this site, close but not quite as far as sewer service. One other thing I'll note, we do have our new environmental health supervisor on the line tonight with us, Angela Manning. And she might want to speak to some of the questions that Mr. Austin's had about the concentration of septic systems. And again, each one of these individual lots will be required to have approval for individual septic systems on the lots, along with 100% repair area. So there's more work to be done. And Angie, I don't know if you at least want to introduce yourself to the board. And Mike, you might have some more information about the soils and some of the information that you might already have in your purview.
I'd be glad to. My name is Angela Mannon. I am the new Environmental Health Director for Pitt County, and this is my second week here. I started last Monday. The subdivision has not officially come to us, so I can only kind of give a preliminary overview. Each lot would get an overview of what the designer would propose as to where the proposed house location or the proposed design septic field would be. It is not out of the, it is commonly done for subdivisions to have septic. James, I'm assuming there's county water or municipal water running through this subdivision. Am I correct?
It is served by Eastern Pines Water, yes.
So we don't have to have individual wells. We will take into account all state rules in regards to any setbacks for any drainage easements, utility easements for these particular lots that are proposed and any changes as well. So we will look at what the design is proposed and in the particular lots that are proposed and design those, look at the septic systems and evaluate what can be approved, either what is proposed by the designer, if the designer comes to us with a proposal, or what we can design based on the proposed septic area. And that's what we'll do when the proposal comes to my division. So I'll be glad to answer any questions that I can.
James, can I add one thing? James.
Sure.
Oh, okay. Just board members, I would like to point out that, as we always do, the first steps to get a soil scientist out there, which we have, so we're not just drawing lines all over a map with no meaning just because they meet the size requirements. And we went ahead and got our environmental guys, land management group out of Wilmington to come up here and delineate the wetlands, and as well as we had the county go out there and go ahead and do the blue line stream call. So I think we've probably been as proactive up to this point as we could be.
Thank you, Mr. Baldwin. Are there any other comments questions from the board for Ms. Manning or Mr. Baldwin?
Hey, Mike, the majority of these lots are half acre, just a little over half acre, is that right?
Yes, sir.
And I hear a lot of concern from those that wrote in talking about drainage. I've heard about drainage even from the board. And it seems to be something that's on all our minds, especially when we looked at what happened just recently with a lot of rain and all over the county. And I guess I don't really have a question here, but again, when I start looking at all these lots and looking at all these septic tanks, I'm just wondering if we're just pushing this particular piece of property for too much, for too little. There again, I'm not the authority either. And in saying that, I would like to refer back to just a moment, because you're also the developer for the cheap farm that we said a while ago we would continue. But Mr. Styron Wood sent us a letter that we got just today or just recently. And he admitted too, he wasn't an authority on drainage, but he did point out some, I thought, great points concerning that particular development. So, and I'm just curious, for all the questions that were read just a moment ago from the people that sent in comments, and you may not be the one to answer that, but I'm just wondering, Jason, did those folks get an answer to the majority of their questions and comments?
We have answered the questions to the best of our abilities as far as how the plan meshes with the subdivision ordinance. And at this time now, if anybody has any further questions when we go to the public comment, I've replied to the best of my ability with things that would relate to like stormwater, riparian buffers, how those rules work, the wetlands. So I think we've answered a lot of questions that people had preliminarily. But if anybody has any now, I hope they'll get answered in the public comment period, because some of it may be a little more in depth than staff here is looking at. Right now, we're just in the preliminary phase. When it goes to the construction, we'll get into a lot more detail as far as the layout, the drainage, and how everything is going to function in this subdivision.
Mr. Steve.
So in the answer to those questions, did those folks come back and just say, okay, I appreciate that and I'm satisfied with the answer, or they didn't come back with anything else? Is that what I'm hearing?
Most of them that have questions, especially related to drainage, most of them are probably here tonight to get questions that we couldn't answer as staff, and they have been directed to Mr. Baldwin. So hopefully he's prepared tonight to answer some of those questions.
Mr. Steve, can I address your question, please?
Yes, sir.
There's a lot of lines on these maps and there's a lot of numbers on them. But if you, and unfortunately, we don't get paid by the line and by the number. If you look in front of lot 5, in between lots 4 and 5, you see in the center of the road, you'll see a HP, which represents a high point.
So it's not the highway. Okay.
What's that?
That's not the highway patrol.
That's not the what?
It's not
highway
the
patrol. I hope people aren't driving that fast. But anyway, from there to your right, that's where all the drainage goes to. So the area to the left of that is just a small number of lots draining into that existing ditch. So the area down to the right is collecting in that natural drainage basin. We did the design on Arden Ridge. So, and I shared this map with Jason earlier today. If you look at the construction drawings or go out in the field on Arden Ridge, that pipe that a driveway crosses is 54 inch. Right here upstream of that is 30 inch. So we've done the proper planning when we did that to allow for the drainage in this. So I hope you can look to see how the pipes in the subdivisions that we designed upstream of that in Sherwin Downs, the pipe under the road is 24 inch. So it gradually gets large. Drainage basin gets, the width of your drainage basin gets larger as it goes. It starts out as a ditch in Sherwin Downs, and as it gets through this, it turns into a wetland area. And it does the same thing in Arden Ridge.
Mr. Chairman, Jay Hemby, could you, I just saw someone pop up asking about the map. He made that reference. Could he put it on screen so folks could see those points he was bringing out?
Thank you. I believe the map's up now.
Okay, so now do you want to show us what you was talking about with HP?
Mike, do you have the plan where you might could pull it up?
It's right here where my finger is. If that, I don't understand these Zoom meetings.
Let's see.
It's in between lot 4 and 5 in the center of the road.
Let's see. For us to zoom in on that, I'm going to need to pull up the actual PDF of that.
Jason, I don't think that's necessary. I think if you put that map back up that you had, it would suffice. You can kind of point between lots 4 and 5. Just if you can move your cursor over to right there and let Mike speak again as to where the water is kind of separating to go into 2 different drainage ways.
Jason, move your mouse around a little bit, make it crawl. Okay, all right, come to your right. Come to your right. About 200 Whoa, stop. There you go. That's the break in the drainage. To the left of that goes to the ditch out toward to the left, and to the right goes down to the riparian buffer that runs, that natural drainage way that runs through this property. And as it gets into Arden Ridge as well, there are only 2 effective properties over there. One person has a great big lot in the back, and the other person has a very large yard to the south of his house.
Okay. Are there any other questions from the board? If not, we'll go to any kind of public comment. Are there any other questions from the board?
I have one more question.
Okay, Mr. Austin.
Thank you. The road itself is being listed as a private road, and it won't be eligible for NCDOT maintenance down the road. I think I've expressed this concern before of how do we guarantee the future of this road, being well maintained and without the state helping out?
Mr. Austin, I can address that. We are encouraging clients to go with private roads now. The homeowners association, with small dues, yearly dues from the residents, I hate to say it, but with the limited funds that the state has, they just can do a better job of keeping the streets up. I'll give you a fine example of one of the larger subdivisions around, Brittany Ridge, a very successful subdivision that Wayne Stokes, Mr. Wayne that passed away several years ago, and Lynn Raymond Hardy developed. Every road out there is state maintained, and you ain't never seen so many potholes. It's just there's no mechanism beyond the state, and it's that way for a lot of them. I've dealt with the people who develop these subdivisions, and then are also the builder, and they the end user has no problems with the roads being private, and then that way they have a say so in their road.
Right.
That's something that would have to be disclosed to the purchaser when they purchase the house, that they'd be responsible for the roads, I believe. Is that correct, Mr. Baldwin?
It is, and there's obviously a homeowners association that's set up and recorded at the same time that the final plat is recorded.
Okay, thank you. I did not realize it was a homeowners association related
Yes,
to this subdivision.
And Mr. Chairman, if I might, Mr. Austin, just so you know, that's written into our subdivision regulations also. If the road is to be privately maintained, our subdivision ordinance requires that a homeowners association be established, and that there's a clause in that, in those restrictions about the maintenance and ensuring that there is a mechanism to have those roads maintained. So just know we've been dealing with private roads for a good long while. We see the importance of making sure there is a maintenance responsibility. There is someone designated for that if it is not a state maintained road. So that is part of our regulations. Before this final plat is recorded, if it's approved, Jason will ensure that we have a homeowners association ready to be recorded at the same time.
Thank you for that clarification, Mr. Rhodes.
All right. So is there anyone here that would like to speak on this issue?
Does that mean public comments?
Yes, please.
Okay, yes, sir.
Let me turn my
Please.
camera on here so
Let
y'all
me
can
just-
see who
let
I
me
am.
just remind everybody that we're going to take about 3 minutes each, and that you should tell us your name and where you live, and as you go forward, okay?
Yes, sir. I'm actually here on behalf of a few neighbors in the Sherwin Downs neighborhood. I was hoping I could get 5 minutes.
Okay.
Okay. I also have would like to share my screen if that's possible.
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
Just a minute. We'll check with our public information offices just to make sure that we're able to do that.
Okay. I just have some pictures and photos and some concerns that the residents of Sherwin Downs sent me. I've kind of been collecting all of this information, so I thought maybe a visual aid of some of these things might be helpful because it's some of the things we've already discussed.
Kyle, can you address that? Kyle or Carla?
That capability is available. It would be at the chairman's discretion to allow that. If there was any obviously objectable material, we would be forced to pull it down.
Yeah, no, sir.
It's at the discretion of the chairman.
I'm perfectly fine with her sharing pictures.
Okay, thank you. We will share this really quickly with you all. I hope y'all can see this. Might need to move it over here. Can you all see this now?
You actually moved it off the screen.
Yeah. Now.
Oh, I did move it off the screen. Okay, let me move it to my other screen then. So you can see this here?
Yes, if you'll just put it in display mode.
All right, and I promise I will keep this under 5 minutes. I talk really fast. I do this for a living, so hopefully y'all can keep up. So as I mentioned, I'm here representing a few neighbors from the Sherwin Downs neighborhood, the Schaefers at 2870 Sherwin Downs, the Cullifers at 2869, and the Harmons at 2830 Sherwin Downs. Let's see. Here, please don't have any issues. All right, so some of the concerns that came up were our school districts. We have Wintergreen, Hope, and Conley, which are already increasingly becoming overcrowded. More students, this would create more students to teacher ratio. Also, one of the neighbors mentioned that Hope had so many incoming 6th graders last year that they were actually unable to assign lockers to most of them. So our question is, how will overcrowding affect the quality of our children's education? As far as traffic, we know that Pitt County has grown exponentially over the last 10 years, especially near North Carolina 33. We're currently building a Target, Chick-fil-A, and what I believe is a TGI Fridays up there. So we're really starting to build that area up. This is going to increase traffic for residents who need to take this road home. Greenville, has one of the highest numbers of traffic accidents in the state. And this could potentially lead to more traffic concerns, injury, and death. So our other question was, who do you love that travels these roads? And I'm going to address roads here in the next slide. These are actually some photos that I took of Tucker Road and some of the disarray that those roads are in already. And while hearing that these roads are going to be paved in 2021 doesn't really seem to be a good year for me, especially if we're going to have a lot of construction trucks up and down these roads. It doesn't seem like the great time to pave them, but just something to consider. What will happen to our roads with these trucks in and out. Also, water was a question that was brought up. How is this going to affect the water that we drink, water supply? I know some people mentioned drainage. How will this affect the current and future water supply? Many residents have concerns about water pressure and our supply being compromised. Also, safety concerns came up. Will Simpson-Grimesland hire more police, fire, rescue to patrol this area? Will North Carolina State Highway Patrol increase in this area? And just how will the residents of this area be kept safe as far as any home break-ins, vehicle break-ins, etc.?
Also, the land, I think that a lot of people have kind of mentioned the same concern. When we heard 55 houses, we were a little like, what? Because in Sherwin Downs, we have 43 houses. I'm not really sure how they're going to squeeze any more in there, but that was a concern with that number 55. And then just, are we not already threatening the habitat with all of these developments that we're already putting up in the Simpson-Grimesland area? I went around and took some photos today. These are all along Tucker Road and along 33. And then our other concern, which just about every neighbor in this neighborhood sent me photos of these lovely deer that love to roam in the back. What about the wildlife that's going to be feeding and grazing in this area? You know, it's a tiny patch of farmland, and it really does do a lot for the wildlife in this area. You know, who's protecting them? We, you know, are going to obviously run them out, and we're not sure where they will go. So those are some of the concerns that I'm bringing from the Sherwin Downs neighborhood. And I have my email at the bottom if anybody has any other questions or information, but I just appreciate you all hearing this presentation and for your consideration.
Thank you, Ms. Herring. I appreciate your input. You were 4 minutes.
Perfect.
So does anybody have any questions for Ms. Herring? All right, is there anyone else that would like to speak?
Yes.
Mr. Is it Cullifer?
Yes, sir. It's Mr. Cullifer. I live at 2869 Sherwin Downs Drive in the Sherwin Downs neighborhood. I own the biggest lot that butts up to the field, and I'm the one that took all those pictures of the deer and stuff. But I don't know. I watched the survey guys when they came out here because I got interested in what they were doing. And they came on probably the prettiest day that you could probably come on. So they didn't really get the full picture of just how this water really looks when it's bad. The two houses that are closest to the woods, which would be at the back of that lot, their yards completely flood right now without any other homes adding to the drainage back there in the wetlands. So my lot, half of my lot, it all comes up in my yard when it rains really bad. And so I don't know if the survey was done on a day when you can actually see what actually happens when it gets bad. But we have tons of wildlife here, and the drainage is a huge issue. I don't know who's conducted the surveys. I know earlier the gentleman mentioned that they were proactive, and I thank them for that. And I think they were proactive, but the proactiveness was done on a very good day. So I don't think they really know what that wetlands looks like when it's flooded, because they obviously have not came in here on a bad day. Almost those three last yards towards the woods completely flood during the rain. But the noise down here is very quiet. We don't really want to add to the noise. 55 homes. You're looking at possibly kids going to the schools that we have. And I don't know if you ever try to take your kids to Wintergreen in the morning, but it is brutal. It's real bad. They even have boards trying to set up to try to get traffic to flow different. I'm actually part of the Chamber of Commerce trying to figure out something right now with it. So I think adding these homes to this neighborhood right here and flowing into Wintergreen is a horrible idea. It is not going to do good. They're already struggling there as it is to try to figure out how to get these kids to school. And I think building this neighborhood right here with 55 lots is going to be a horrible decision to do moving forward. That's just my concerns. The drainage is horrible if you ever come out here on a bad day.
Mr. Chairman, 3 minutes.
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Cullifer. Are there any questions
Thank
the
you.
board for Mr. Cullifer. All right. Is there any other?
RJ Hemby, my question, I've heard it about 3 times now, RJ Hemby, about the size of the project, 55, the number. Is there a number that you would have in mind that you feel will be comfortable as a way of compromise?
When you say a number, are you meaning lots?
Lots, yes. You said 55 is too many. So what would you feel will not impact it negatively and you will feel comfortable?
I don't think there's any number that could not impact what we're trying to do here. You can't take away this farmland and not add noise. You can't take away and add to this neighborhood and not add kids and traffic to the schools that are already overflowing as it is. And there really is no number. I think the project just doesn't need to go through. I understand where you're coming from as far as compromise, but this area is already getting built so much right now that adding another one to it is not, it's not a good idea. It's not. And like I said, they have not came out here and looked at this neighborhood at the back on a bad day. Half of that field back there is completely underwater on a bad day. I see it all the time because I live here. So the guys that came out here, I watched them on what day they came, and it was a good day. And I understand why they came on a good day. They probably didn't want to get wet, but that doesn't show or paint the picture that needs to be painted before a decision is made to throw a bunch of lots out here and kids and families and extra stuff on a road that's already tore up, and you've already talked about paving it in 2021, and then just going to turn around and destroy it.
Thank
and
you,
then
Mr. Cullifer. I appreciate your input, Mr. Hemby. Is that?
Yeah,
okay.
That's the question I would have. I have another question once we get through. You can go ahead. Yeah. Thank you.
Are there any other members of the public that would like to speak on this issue? All right, Mr. Baldwin, would you like to say anything else?
Sir, the only thing I would like to add is it took many days to survey that piece of land. There were some good days and there were some bad days. During flash floods, I'm sure there's water in the ditches, but you know, we're going to submit our plans through your office. Your office is going to send it, James's office. They're going to send it out to the review agencies, and I feel like we'll get a thorough review and make sure we abide by all the laws that we have enforced at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Baldwin. Jason, Mr. Bryant.
Can you hear me?
Just a moment, Ms. Struman.
Oh,
Mr.
okay.
Bryant,
I'm sorry.
Mr. Chair.
Can you go through the list of the agencies that do review these plans for us? And again?
Yes. So we have the North Carolina Department of Transportation. We have the Pitt County Environmental Health Division. We have the Pitt County Engineering Department. We have Pitt County Emergency Services Department. We have Pitt County Soil and Water Conservation District, the Soil Conservation Service, the U.S. Postal Service, and Southeastern Drainage District.
And is there one of those, I know that we've heard a lot about drainage, is there one of those particular agencies that deals specifically with the drainage?
Mr. Chair, the Pitt Soil and Water would be looking at drainage. Engineering would look closely at the drainage and how it would function within the subdivision.
Okay.
And also Pitt County Environmental Health is going to make sure that the way the drainage is configured and how the septic systems are laid out, that all of that is going to function properly.
Okay. Thank you. Ms. Truman, would you like to speak?
Yes, I would. If
Okay.
I could, please. I'm sorry. I'm not very good at Zooming. I'll do my best.
You're fine.
The property that I own is actually shares that wetland that Mr. So-and-so was just speaking about with regard to on Sherwin Downs. As you look at the plat as it's proposed, I think they have my property listed as number 38 on Sherwin Downs. I share what is a 30-foot easement with that 404 wetland on the right-hand side as you look at the map. I can attest to the problems that we're having with regard to overflow and flooding. I would bring to the committee's attention that this subdevelopment was built in 2005. And probably at that point, that wetland was sufficient with the greater drainage basin area to process the water that was moving into that area. As it stands now, it's not. We are constantly dealing with overflows of that area into those adjacent properties. Not only that, but the water table in general has increased in this area. And in my property in particular, I'm seeing sinkholes. I have greater instances of standing water. Just with the water from yesterday, which was nothing intense, I would not consider that a severe rain event. We had flooding. I've still got standing water in my backyard. The ditches are full. And again, with regard to the concern for the wetland, in years past, there would be several instances during the year when that wetland would drain completely, which was, I think, the intention for it. It's not meant to always be a soggy, wet, watered area. That enabled me to get in during those dry periods and clean out, which was a lot of deadfall and debris that could clog those culverts that drain that wetland across and under Sherwin Downs across the street. This whole wetlands extends through this area. This wetland now, as it stands, has not been dry for the last 3 years. There's standing water in it all the time. And unless we get large rains that has a tendency to flush it out, what happens is this then becomes a stagnant, stinky mess. It breeds mosquitoes. It's awful. That speaks to the drainage concerns that I have. I think what has occurred, I'm not a scientist, I can't say for sure. My concern though is that in these past several years, with the increased development within this basin area, there's no hope that water is not going to all flow into these wetlands. And Mr. Baldwin was just saying that that's supposedly the intention of it. I have a real concern that this is not the intention of this particular wetland to handle these volumes of water. And I would ask that the planning department really review with consideration bringing in some additional agencies to do a more in-depth study of how the water in this area is currently being managed, the direction of the flow. I also have a septic system with a drain field that's going to be adversely affected with these 3 properties that are going to go in directly behind me. And I'm worried about what is the complete destruction of the woodlands that are behind us in order to add these 20-some houses beyond what is this agricultural land.
Thank you, Ms. Truman. I appreciate your comments.
Okay, I'm sorry. I didn't.
You're fine. You're fine. We exceeded our 3 minutes. Are there any other members of the public that would like to comment? All right. Are there any questions from the board, or do I hear any motion? This is a conditional approval recommendation from the technical review committee from the planning staff. Do I hear any discussion or any motions from the planning board?
Could I ask another question? This is Mr. Cullifer, 2869.
We've reached the end of that opportunity, Mr. Cullifer. I think you had your time.
Okay.
Thank you.
Chairman R.J. Hemby.
Yes, sir.
I will offer a motion in the way of, with all the requirements and the conditions and all the agencies that's necessary to participate, to make sure that they do participate. The motion will be based on on that, we will offer a motion to move forward with it.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hemby. Mr. Hemby has made a motion to approve the conditional approval for Tucker Hill Farm. Do I hear a second? No seconds? All right, the motion to approve fails. Is there another motion?
Well, I will make them, since my first motion failed, I guess I get a chance to try again. I'll try
right.
3 times. This second motion would be with, if we can get, I guess, to get the developers to reconsider, and I guess with the residents, and back to this, been here before, to get with them and come up with a suitable recommendation for the homeowners in the area. Whatever they feel when they would be comfortable and come back, support the request. With this much negative, we don't have even a motion to approve. So my motion would be that that the developer and Jason property owner would get together and.
Thank you, Mr. Hemby. Mr. Smith,
Mr.
can
Chairman.
we, as a planning board, ask that the developer approach the neighbors again, as Mr. Hemby's motion for us to do?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Really, the options for this body are to approve it, conditionally approve it, or to deny it. Those are really the range of your options. And I'll just say that our subdivision approval process is set up as an administrative process, meaning the preliminary plat either meets the standards contained in the ordinance or it does not. Our preliminary plat requirements contained in the ordinance, and I don't want to oversimplify this, but essentially requires a map of the parcel showing proposed layout of the lots, roads, and other features. And a number of the details that were raised by concerns are things that aren't required at the preliminary plat review stage, things that were required at the construction plan review, which happens after, if this board grants the preliminary plat.
Thank you very much for that clarification.
Mr. Chairman, can I speak?
Mr. Ball, we're in the deliberation phase right this second. Let's.
Yeah. Okay, that's 2 for 2. That's 2 for 2, Mr. Chairman. My third one. I would like to offer a motion that we deny this request.
Okay, there's a motion to deny. Do I hear a second? All right, folks. We need to approve or deny.
I move we grant conditional approval. And now, that's where I had to have the clarifications on the conditional, but I move that we grant conditional approval.
Okay, so the motion to deny has failed, and Mr. Little has made another motion to approve conditionally the technical review committee's approval of the subdivision. Do I hear a second for that?
I'll second it.
And that was Ms. Barefoot?
Yeah.
So we have a motion and a second for approval.
Conditional approval.
Conditional approval. Ms. Otten, can you take a roll call, please?
Fred Austin,
Approve.
Approve it.
Faye Barefoot,
Approval.
Don Brown,
Approve.
Naomi Buck,
Say it again.
Approved.
David Davenport,
Approve.
Brad Guth,
Approve.
RJ Hemby,
No.
Steve Little,
Approved.
Tucker Moore, Tucker Moore. Maria Rogerson.
Approved.
And Tucker Moore, are you still with us?
I think he's gone.
Tucker does not look like he is in the meeting any longer.
That's everyone.
All right, so the motion to approve carries with one objection, and I guess Tucker is abstention since we haven't heard from him.
I believe, Mr. Chair, since he was present at the beginning of the meeting, his vote would actually, since no one excused him, his vote would go with the majority.
Okay.
And I've got my assistant county attorney here, if he'll verify that.
That is correct.
Okay, so the motion is passed.
And Mr. Chair, if I might just ad lib a little bit here, if you don't mind. I know it's been a long meeting and we've got several public comments here. I'd just like to stress to the board, remember, we've got a strict guideline of rules and regulations that are dictated in the subdivision ordinance. They're black and white, very objective. We have purposely removed any objectivity. You might recall we went through a process with our street interconnectivity standards a few years ago just to remove that subjectivity. So when it comes to you guys, the technical review committee has reviewed it, has made its recommendation based on these technical requirements, any number of those items. We are somewhat limited. We don't have a broad discretion like we do with a rezoning case. This is by the technical requirements. So I think what was mentioned by the assistant attorney as well as the chair, we need to ensure we're following those regulations. If there are some concerns with those regulations, if you feel like we need additional amendments, we can consider those. And it might be a good time. I think our next items are dealing with amendments to both the zoning ordinance and subdivision regulations. So I just want to make you aware of that before we move into the next phase.
Thank you,
Mr. Chairman.
So our next item is Mr. Gooby and Mr. Bryant are going to update us on the Chapter 160D updates in our zoning.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair. We'll go through we'll be going through our zoning ordinance amendments based off 160D. I'm going to share my screen here. Is everybody seeing that okay?
Yes.
Okay. So as we've been talking about for a while, we are proposing a substantial number of amendments, particularly to the zoning ordinance, to bring it into compliance with the new Chapter 160D of the North Carolina General Statutes. As we've talked about before, it's a major modernization and rewrite of the planning statutes for the state. Changes a lot of things that we have had in place for a number of years. And so this is to bring this ordinance into compliance with those statutes. We're also proposing several amendments that aren't related to 160D. These are mainly for clarification and consistency purposes, or have resulted from some things that have come up in our enforcement of the ordinance. Some sort of quality of life enhancements, I guess you want to say, for the ordinance. Before I get into it too much, I want to kind of pull up the ordinance, or pull up the summary that you got. If I can, let's see, I guess I got to stop sharing this real quick. Let's see. And I want to bring up this. You should have this in your packet, I think on page 34. This is a summary of all the amendments. I'm not going to go through each one of these line by line. We're going to do a little more broad overview of what we're proposing. But this in your packet, like I said, shows each section of the ordinance in terms of what is being required, which sections are being amended in particular. And we're still working on finalizing this draft language. Legal's still looking at it, Jordan's looking at it, and we've got to kind of finish clarifying a few things that we're looking at. But for the most part, this gives you a good idea of the number of amendments we've got, what we're proposing, and how that all sort of fits in with our requirements or with our zoning ordinance. So let me get back to my. So the first major amendment, probably the most major amendment to the ordinance is we are changing conditional use permits. The statutes no longer allow us to use the term conditional use permits. It says that they have to be considered special use permits. Now, our ordinance already has special use permits in it, and the delineation was that conditional use permits went to the Board of County Commissioners. Special use permits go to the Board of Adjustment. We had proposed last year to take all those conditional use permits and send them or change them to special use permits and send them all to the Board of Adjustment. The county commissioners indicated that they wanted to retain the control over those types of permits and that review. So what we are proposing is for conditional use permits and special use permits, we'll change those to Class 1 and Class 2 special use permits. So it's still the same type of permit, but if it's a Class 1, which will be shown as S1 in our permitted use table, that will go back to the Board of County Commissioners. If it's an S2, that will go to the Board of Adjustment. And so what you see on your screen here, that's a list of all those conditional use permits. We are proposing a couple of changes, fairly minor changes. The ordinance in our executive summary and commentary says that conditional use permits should be those sort of controversial type uses or ones that involve some expenditure of public funds. So that's why we have mining operations, solar farms, correctional institutes, group care and halfway homes, those sorts of things. Those are all sort of more controversial, or some of those ones like solid waste or waste treatment plants, those would involve some expenditure of public funds. With the special use permits that we have, again, changing those to Class 2 special use permits, those will be shown as an S2 in the permitted use table. Those will continue to be heard by the Board of Adjustment. Then the minor changes we're looking at is we would like to have the daycare centers, both adult and child and residential daycares, as well as wedding event facilities. Instead of having those as conditional use or special Class 1 special use permits heard by the board, those typically aren't controversial requests. They aren't, again, they don't require any kind of public funds, and have those go to the Board of Adjustment instead. And so that would kind of take that off the commissioner's plate. So they wouldn't have to necessarily spend their time dealing with daycares which are typically, I don't want to say a rubber stamp, but they're typically more easily approved, and there's very little opposition most times to those. And so take those to the Board of Adjustment, let them hear those requests. Now, we do have a couple of what we probably consider controversial type uses in there still. Sexual oriented businesses and shooting ranges. We'd like to keep those going to the Board of Adjustment. Those also have their own standalone ordinances. And so those sort of need a sort of a more in-depth review that the Board of Adjustment can provide, as opposed to maybe the Board of County Commissioners. Also looking to clarify and broaden the conflicts of interest language in the ordinance. The statutes now say that no member of the Board of Commissioners or an elected body or any appointed board shall vote on any legislative decision, and no staff member may also make any final administrative decision. So they can't be voting on any rezonings, text amendments, or we as staff can't be approving site plans or issuing permits for things that we would have a substantial and direct financial impact or interest on that decision, or if there is a close familial business or associational relationship with the applicant or the landowner. In addition, any board that exercises quasi-judicial functions, that's those special use permits, that's variances, appeals. No member of any board exercising those types of functions shall participate or vote on any matter that would violate a person's due process rights or that would make them an impartial decision maker. And that includes having a fixed opinion that's not susceptible to change, having any undisclosed ex parte communications, or again, having those close familial or associational relationships or the financial interests. And then finally, no staff member may be financially interested or employed by a business that is subject to regulation by the zoning ordinance, unless they're the owner of the land or the building that's involved in any type of request. So in other words, I couldn't have a real estate business on the side that would be developing property that would be subject to regulation by this ordinance. That would be a conflict of interest for myself. Also, no staff member or contracted employees should engage in any work that's inconsistent with their duties or the interests of the county. Now, as I talk about the quasi-judicial procedures and hearings, the statutes really provide more clarification on those hearings and those procedures. So for those types of things like special use permits, variances, it does require an evidentiary hearing. And the statutes are very clear in making sure that it is considered an evidentiary hearing. And I'll talk about this in a little bit, but a lot of times you hear about a public hearing, and evidentiary hearings are not public hearings. They're not for members of the general public. They're for people who have standing to come and present evidence on a case. And so the ordinance, we're proposing some amendments to sort of clarify that language. Mailed and posted notice is still required. As I mentioned, anybody who's considered to have standing, and the statutes outline what constitutes standing to appeal. Typically in these cases, it would be somebody that may suffer some sort of special damage based off the case. They all have a right to participate and present evidence to the board. The zoning administrator is required to transmit any applications, reports, materials to the board for the hearing record. And the board is able to rule on any objections to if there's anything that needs to be included or anything that another party feels like needs to be excluded from the record. And then the board would still determine contested facts and make its decision within a reasonable time. One of the other changes is that if a hearing has been convened, so if they've already met and say it goes deep into the night and they decide that they can't make a decision that night, they need to continue to another meeting, they can continue that meeting without further advertisement. And also if a meeting has been duly advertised and notice has been given, but the board can't get a quorum, that meeting can be continued to the next meeting without any other advertisement also. Decisions have to be in writing. And one of the main changes is any kind of conditions that are attached to a special use permit, those have to be consented to in writing by the applicant before they can be enforced. Decisions are effective upon the date they're filed with the clerk of the board and the planning department. And those copies of that decision may be delivered by personal delivery, email, or first class mail. So I think email is a new addition to the statutes for those delivery options. And then every decision is subject to appeal to Superior Court. And those have to be filed within 30 days of the effective date of the decision. And if that decision is delivered by first class mail, we have to add an additional 3 days to that. Another major section that we are revising is based off vested rights, and also adding what the statutes are calling permit choice. And I'll talk about that in a second. The vested rights statutes are changing in terms of mainly terminology and definition, and also some of the vesting periods are changing. So a vested right is the right to undertake and complete development of the property under the terms and conditions of an approved site-specific investing plan that used to be called a site-specific development plan. One of the things that's sort of a common thread through these amendments is that we have to sort of mimic the state terminology. So our ordinance says site-specific development plan. We've got to change that, all those references, to say site-specific vesting plan. A person claiming a vested right can submit that to the zoning administrator. They can appeal that decision to the Board of Adjustment, or they can skip both of those altogether and take a civil action and have a court decide whether they have a common law vested right or not. Those site-specific vesting plans, that's a legislative hearing at a minimum that's held by the Board of Commissioners. They've got to review that plan and determine if it can be granted a vesting or a vested right under that statute. If the use that's proposed is a special use, it also has to be quasi-judicial, just like the hearing for the permit itself. And one of the changes, like I said, the state has changed the vesting periods for some of these, where it used to be just a minimum of 2 years that was allowed for vesting for a plan. It now gives a range from 2 up to 5 years, and it can be provided up to 5 years based off certain conditions like the size, the phasing of the development, how much investment there is, market considerations, and that sort of thing. Another new option is what they call a multi-phase development. This is a development that it's a large-scale development that's developed over a number of different phases. It requires approval of a master development plan following that same procedure for the site-specific vesting plan. So you're talking about a hearing before the Board of County Commissioners, and they have to grant that vesting approval. In terms of the phase development, it has to be a minimum of 25 acres and submitted for approval in more than one phase. And it has to have elements on the plan that show the type and intensity of each phase. And that vesting period that the state is granting now is up to 7 years, or a minimum of 7 years for that development. And then we move into permit choice, which is another type of sort of vested right. And what that says is if you have submitted an application for an approval, whether it's a zoning permit, special use permit, could be anything, even a soil erosion or subdivision plan, it's any type of development approval. Once you've submitted your application, if the rule or the ordinance that is governing that application changes at some point after the submittal but before the approval, the applicant has the right to choose which version of that rule will apply. So if somebody submits a plan, after that plan is submitted, say lot sizes or the uses that are allowed in that district change, they're allowed to choose whether they want that new rule to apply or not. And also, if they choose that previous version, they're not required to await the outcome of that amendment. So they can go ahead and choose the old rule, proceed on with their review, get their approval, and then the amendment can go through. If multiple permits are required, they can choose the version of each development regulation that's applicable at the time that they initially submitted their permit or for their permit. But that's only within 18 months of that initial approval. If the ordinance is amended after a permit is wrongly denied, and that's determined on appeal. So if a permit is denied or there's an illegal condition and they appeal it and it's been found to be illegal or wrongfully denied, they can also choose which version of the ordinance will apply. And then also if that application is put on hold at the request of the applicant for a period of 6 months or more, that review can be discontinued, and when it's picked back up, those new regulations will apply. So as I mentioned, also one of the important things is to make sure that our terms and our definitions that are in our ordinance are also consistent with the general statutes. For instance, so just an example, like I said, with conditional use permit, we can no longer use that term. We have to use a special use permit, so we're splitting those up. Public hearing, you'll probably still hear us refer to a public hearing, but under the statutes, that is called a legislative hearing now. It's not technically a public hearing, but the language we're proposing will say that it's also referred to as a public hearing. So, but when we say that, know that we'll be talking about a legislative hearing, not an evidentiary hearing, which requires those quasi-judicial procedures. Also, general zoning districts, statutes now call those conventional zoning districts. So you'll see that change in our ordinance as well. So just an example for, there's a lot of new definitions we're adding, again, to be consistent with those requirements. I won't go through all those. We're also updating quite a few definitions to meet those requirements. And then we'll be deleting several definitions also that just aren't in use anymore. Like I said, with conditional use permit, unzoned areas. We have a definition for unzoned areas, but we don't have any unzoned areas in the county, so we don't need technically a definition for that. So we'll be looking also to clarify our enforcement procedures. Notices of violation, again, the main change for that is they can be actually delivered by electronic delivery now, in addition to the personal delivery, first class mail, or being posted on the property. Also, zoning administrators may now issue stop work orders. Those were previously usually reserved for a building inspector. But if we find that any work is in violation of state or local law, or it's an endangering life or property, we as the zoning administrator can now issue a stop work order, and that can then be appealed to the Board of Adjustment. And then also clarifying the reasons behind why permits can be revoked, usually substantial departure from the application or plans, if somebody's just refusing to comply with the requirements of the ordinance, or if they've made some kind of false statements or misrepresentations to obtain that permit. Under Board of Adjustment, just like I said with the quasi-judicial procedures with appeals, that's also a quasi-judicial procedure. So again, any person with standing can appeal an administrative decision. So if we have issued a permit, or if we have made a determination, a written determination on a use or some sort of regulation under the zoning ordinance, somebody with standing can appeal that decision. And then appeals do stay enforcement and accrual of fines while that appeal is being considered. And then the Board of Adjustment also handles variances, which, as you might know, those are granted when there's a hardship, and that the ordinance language would cause some strict interpretation or enforcement of the ordinance would sort of make somebody unable to do anything with their property or cause them some harm. And so now with variances, a variance can be issued or granted if it's needed to make reasonable accommodations under the Federal Fair Housing Act for a person with a disability. Probably more applicable to this board, we'll be looking at some revisions to our zoning amendment requirements. One of the requirements is that down zonings, which are when you go from a higher intensity designation to a lower one. So if you have a commercial property and it's going down to maybe residential, a third party down zoning where somebody else is applying for the property that they don't own, that's not permitted or enforceable without the written consent of the property owner. Now, we already have some requirements in our ordinance that an applicant has to have a notarized signature from the property owner before we can accept the application. So we're already somewhat in compliance with that. And also, those downzonings can be initiated by the county without that consent. As you know, also the planning board has to provide a written recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners. We already do that as well. The chairman signs a statement for us after every meeting stating the board's recommendation and provides that statement of consistency and reasonableness. The major change with this is the statutes now say that that recommendation has to be forwarded within 30 days of referring to the Board of County Commissioners, whereas previously our ordinance and I think the state statutes gave 45 days. So not a big change. We're still usually in compliance with that, but just know that has been reduced. The commissioners, when they're taking action, they also have to adopt the consistency statement. The statutes now say that statement can be met if there's a clear indication in the minutes of the meeting that the commissioners were aware of and considered this board's recommendation and any relevant portions of the land use plan. So they don't have to adopt a specific statement itself. They also had to provide a statement of reasonableness, and the statutes now provide criteria of what they could consider. That can include the size or the physical conditions of the property, any benefits or detriments to the surrounding community. They can look at the relationship between the area that it's in and what the current regulations allow and then what the new regulations allow, whether it's in the public interest and if there's any sort of conditions that have changed in the area that warrant that improvement or that amendment. Then also, as we talked about before with these consistency statements, if a zoning amendment is approved, but the board deems it inconsistent with the adopted land use plan, that decision also automatically amends the future land use map in the land use plan. It doesn't require any additional application or hearing. Also, plan amendments. So if somebody wants to amend the land use plan so that it makes it consistent with a zoning amendment that they're proposing, those can also be considered concurrently now. It was sort of ambiguous before. A lot of places require a land use plan amendment to go forward before a rezoning comes in. Some places have done it concurrently. The county here, we've done it concurrently before. And now the statutes say explicitly it can be considered together. Consistency statements can address an overall rezoning if it includes 50 properties or more with at least 50 property owners. And just like special use permits in a conditional zoning district, any sort of conditions or standards are not enforceable without the written consent of the applicant. And then another change is that if there's any minor modifications to a conditional zoning district, if they need to reorient a building or change something, as long as it's not involving a change in the use or the overall density of the development, that can be approved at a staff level by the zoning administrator rather than having to take it back before the commissioners. We do have one use that we're looking to add that's new, that's now authorized by Chapter 160D, and that's called a temporary healthcare structure. And we're adding that to the permitted use table as well as to Section 8, which is the development standards section for individual uses. And what this is, it's an accessory structure that goes on a piece of property that's owned by a caregiver or a guardian for the purposes of providing care for someone who is mentally or physically impaired. So in our table of uses, we're looking to allow that in all our residential districts. And then the standards come right from the statutes. They state that no more than one temporary healthcare structure is allowed on a lot with a principal single-family dwelling. It has to comply with all the setback requirements that are applicable to the residents, the principal residents. They can't provide any kind of signage or advertising. And it has to be removed within 60 days in which that impaired person is no longer receiving assistance. And then it also, if that person has to come back or if they have a new person, another person that comes in that needs assistance, they can also reinstate it and put it back on the property. So those are the 160D amendments. We do, as I mentioned, we have these other amendments that we're looking at that are not necessarily 160D related. The main one is in table 5-1, which are a table of permitted uses. We have just to kind of give some clarification. The table of permitted uses and Section 8, which is the development standards, those work together. They refer to each other. And so went through and made sure that all those uses that are in the table are classified the right way to match up what's in those development standards. Did find a few that needed some adjustment, so that's what we're going to talk about here in a second. But one of the things, sort of one of those quality of life amendments I talked about is adding a column that will sort of index or cross-reference Section 8. So if there's a use in the table that's got development standards that are required, it'll have that section, so you can go right to that section to figure out where those requirements are, so you don't have to flip through a whole lot in the ordinance. Adding 3 uses, manufactured home, low density residential district. That is actually, it's a use that's in Section 8 and has development standards, but it wasn't on the table. So we're adding that in, making sure that's right. That temporary healthcare structure I just went through, we'll be adding that. Also landfill, sanitary solid waste. That was a use that has a definition in the ordinance, but it wasn't in the table or in the development standards. So we'll be adding that to both of those. And then just correcting are amending some of the uses that are in there. Golf driving range, going to be correcting the codes that didn't have the right codes under GC and HC. Same thing for fire station, emergency medical service, correcting those in the RA and RR. Theater outdoor, correcting those codes in the GC and HC. Solid waste disposal, that's a use that has some development standards, things like setbacks that are required in one district, but were not required in the GI. And we felt like that with something of that type of use needed those standards also in the GI. So we're adding that. And then radio, television, or communication tower over 60 feet in height, those are typically cell towers. We only allow those in a few districts, but as everybody's aware, cell towers have pretty much become a public utility or necessity at this point. And so in order to make sure that those providers don't have gaps in their coverage in the county, that we can allow them in all our districts. And so tying into that with Section 8, we're looking to add some or fix some things that we found in there. One is to add heavy construction contractors to other contractor uses. For whatever reason, it's in the table, but it wasn't in the development standard. So added that, and also clarified the districts where those contractor uses are allowed. Daycare uses, just kind of clarifying the zoning districts to make sure it's consistent with the permitted use table. Clarifying those farm supplies and equipment and farm supplies other. One is retail trade and one is wholesale trade. So it's just making sure that that distinction is known or is made clear in that section, and also clarifying those districts where they're allowed. As mentioned, golf driving range, adding HC or that heavy commercial to those districts, adding the landfill, sanitary solid waste to those uses. Then private campground RV park, we need to add that to, or add rural commercial to those districts. And one other thing we're looking at doing is we want to amend the interior road access width to accommodate emergency vehicle access. The ordinance currently only requires a 10-foot wide road. And we had a park that came through the last year or two. And when emergency services, when they reviewed the plan, the fire marshal reviewed it, that 10-foot wasn't enough for a fire truck to get in. The fire prevention code requires a wider road. And so we're asking to amend the ordinance to basically reflect that it needs to be wide enough to accommodate emergency vehicle access. And so when those plans come in, the fire marshal will review them and advise on whether that's appropriate or not. Then also those cell towers over 60 feet in height, allowing those in all districts. Retreat conference center, that's also supposed to be in the R40 district, so we're adding that. Solar energy facilities or solar farms, we're asking to amend the use separation for those. They have a 50-foot setback for all equipment. Currently, that's measured from the property line. We're proposing to measure that from the boundary of the facility, the overall facility, rather than that property line, because when you have a large solar farm that sort of covers several properties, you got interior property lines inside that facility, and there's no need to have that setback off those interior lines. It's all under the same control of the developer, and so we're proposing that just amend it to measure those setbacks from the boundary as opposed to the property lines. And again, that's also similar to what we do for mining operations. If the board, y'all might remember a year or two ago, we amended those so that those setbacks were also measured off the boundary or the permit boundary. Solid waste disposal and theater outdoor, again, adding those districts to make sure it's consistent with the permitted use table. One of the other requirements that we're looking at is amending some of our landscaping requirements. Section 10 is currently titled off-street parking, stacking, and loading areas. And this is where we have our parking and loading area landscaping requirements. Currently, those requirements only kick in for a commercial use when they have 10 or more parking spaces. And then that screening is really only around the parking area. And so what our proposal is, we've seen some instances where uses have come in, they don't require those 10 spaces. And so there's no screening provided unless it's required under those development standards that I mentioned. And so what we'd like to amend it to is to require any sort of non-residential use, new non-residential use, except for farming activities, to require those uses to provide a 10-foot buffer on the road right away and the adjoining property lines along residential properties. So that way we can make sure that these non-residential uses are being screened appropriately from adjacent residences. As we've had instances where you have a commercial use come in, they don't require those 10 spaces, but you may have a big building, you may have a lot of yard in the back, may have some outdoor storage. And if it doesn't have a development standard specifically for landscaping, then nothing is required. And so we'd like to kind of beef that up and change those requirements. Also, there's some alternative screening that's allowed in the ordinance. One is that if you have a buffer yard or if you have a wall or an opaque fence that's at least 5 feet high, the ordinance says you can reduce the amount of the buffer yard, but it doesn't specify how much to reduce it by. And so that's a very subjective language. And so what we're proposing is if you provide that wall or fence, you can reduce your buffer yard up to 5 feet. So reducing it in half, but you have that wall and fence, and then any sort of plantings would also be on the outside of the fence. So again, just to remove that subjectivity from that language. And then also berms can be used as an alternative screening requirement or alternative screening method. We want to, currently the minimum height for those is 3 feet. We want to raise that up to 5. It matches that fencing requirement for those walls and fences, and also require them to be planted with a permanent ground cover, typically grass, so that it stabilizes it against erosion. We've had some instances where, particularly with some sand mines, where they provide a berm for screening. They just dump the dirt out there. It's not stabilized. It rains and all that dirt washes either into the ditches or the streams or on the neighboring property, and it causes a lot of problems. So we feel like if that is going to be a method that somebody's going to use, they need to stabilize it. Just some other brief amendments. I'm going to be updating and amending the executive summary and the commentary in the ordinance. Also looking to remove one little small section. It's section 3W, called Certificate of Zoning Compliance. The way it's worded, it's almost like issuing a certificate of occupancy, like inspections. We don't do that. We do annual inspections to ensure the properties are in compliance, and so we don't issue a certificate on them. It's just an enforcement action. We're going to look to add some graphics to illustrate those landscaping requirements. Also updating the appendices. There's some charts in the back that state what is required to be submitted when you submit a plan. And it doesn't include sketch plans, so we're going to add those. And then just throughout the ordinance, I'm going to be updating the statutory references, as well as correcting any formatting errors, any typos, numbering areas, that sort of thing. So again, we're going to be sort of finalizing this language over the next month or so, and presenting that back to y'all next month on the 21st for a public hearing for your review and recommendation. And then in May and June, we'll be looking to take that back to the Board of County Commissioners for their consideration, all in the hopes of this effective date of July 1st that's mandated by the statute. So as we finish it up, if I can show you real quick, just as an example of what we've got here. This is what the ordinance looks like right now. You can see there's a lot of stuff being changed, a lot of stuff being added. Anything you see in red is a change. And so this is what we're working on. Going to try to finalize this, hopefully get it posted on our website for y'all to look at a little more in depth. If you have any questions though, we'll be glad to answer them, and I'll be glad to answer any questions right now if anybody has. It's a lot of information, so
thank you, Mr.
taking notes.
Thank you for all your work on getting those amendments done. Are there any questions from the board for Mr. Gooby? All right. Guess Mr. Rhodes is up next. Thank you again, Mr. Gooby.
Thank you.
Actually, Mr. Chair, there are a few minor subdivision ordinance amendments too, so I'm just going to let
Okay.
Jason mention those fairly
All right.
quickly, and I'll
All
only
right.
hold you a minute after that.
Mr. Bryant?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chapter 160D updates for the subdivision and manufactured home park ordinances. They will be very similar. Some of the updates that will be required to these ordinances will be terminology and citations, references to the law. These provisions are chapters 160A and 163A to indicate relevant provisions in 160D. We will have to change the ordinance definitions. Some of those definitions will be the definition of a subdivision, just to clean up some of that language. What the term developer, building, dwelling, and other similar definitions. Conflict of interest, just as Eric went over, the conflict of interest will be the same in the subdivision ordinance, just restricting those relationships where there are financial interests. Administrative decisions will have to provide in print or electronic form. This adds where the electronic form is used, then it must be protected from further editing. We also must provide applications for development approvals. They may be made in person with a property interest in the property or a contract to purchase the property, and provide development approvals shall run with the land, and for revocation of development approvals must follow the same process as we used for the approval. Determinations, again, in electronic form, it lists the various ways that we can make a determination and contact and send that out. And again, the electronic has to be protected. We also have to change the term public hearing. This will change to legislative in the subdivision ordinance as well as the manufactured home. This will be in the situation of changing amendments in the ordinance. Additional items that we're looking at, we'd like to add language to clarify access requirements. These are in section 142 of the subdivision ordinance. These changes proposed include requiring the ability to obtain a driveway permit with numerous subdivisions. That's been a hot topic, and also establishing separation criteria for flag lots and seeking NCDOT approval for all access points connecting to the state maintained road network. Does the board have any questions on those items?
Thank you, Mr. Bryant. Mr. Rhodes?
Yes, and again, that will also be a public hearing next time on the subdivision ordinance. So we'll make sure that everything's properly noticed and make sure that everything's ready to go for your next meeting, Mr. Chair. So with that, hopefully you can see my screen now.
Yes, sir.
And I'm gonna just run over a few things real quickly. We do have an important comprehensive transportation plan survey that is out there. Ben and I have been working on that with a large group of people here in the Pitt County area, including some of our partners with our transportation groups, the Metropolitan Planning Organization and the Rural Planning Organization, and several DOT staff members. This is a vital project for us. Our last comprehensive transportation plan is about 15 years old. It is past time, past due to be updated. This plan is going to be countywide, including all the municipalities. So it is very important. We've got a survey. We want to collect some information up front. That survey is live now. The link is included in your package, and we will also have it on our website, and that's listed at the bottom of the screen right now. The other thing I wanted to bring you up to date on, remember at your last meeting, you provided a favorable recommendation for the NC 43 South land use plan. We held a public hearing with the commissioners at Monday night's meeting, had a fair amount of discussion. We've been receiving comments. Remember, this was a virtual public hearing. By state statute, we're now required to give an additional 24 hours after the public hearing to get any comments. We did receive additional comments. All said, the commissioners decided to wait until the April 5th meeting to take action on this plan. So there are, a lot of new things that we discussed in that area, certainly revolve around the sewer availability and the density of development. And at this point, Greenville Utilities is actively extending some sewer lines, and in turn, that is going to promote denser development. A lot of same concerns that you heard on one of the subdivisions tonight, the school systems being overburdened in that area, stormwater issues, traffic issues. So there'll be more discussion about that certainly at the April 5th meeting. Also, not in your agenda, but we'll have it posted on our website. You've heard discussion about stormwater issues around the county. We've got the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, 2 different teams that have been working on both a Tar Pamlico and Neuse River Basin feasibility study. Just remember, our county is about 60-40, about 60% goes into the Tar Basin, about 40% in the southern part flows into the Neuse Basin. So out of this study, the Corps of Engineers plans to develop some flood risk management alternatives. And certainly we're in need of that here in Eastern North Carolina, specifically in Pitt County. So that is March 30th. These 2 teams from the Corps of Engineers have decided to meet together on March 30th at 6 p.m. That will be a virtual meeting, and we will have the link and other information posted on our webpage. There's also your departmental monthly report that's available. Other correspondence and articles are involved that are involving you are included in your package. And with that, Mr. Chairman, we welcome any questions. I know we held you long tonight, but a lot of information to be shared about the upcoming amendments. So we appreciate everyone staying online for the duration. And again, if you have any questions tonight, we're here, or certainly reach out, Eric, Jason, Ben, myself, and we'll be glad to assist any way we can.
Thank you, Mr. Rhodes, and thank you for the great job that you and the planning staff do, keeping everything going. I attended the public hearing on North Carolina 43, and there was lots of interesting discussion on that. So I look forward to seeing how that's going to move forward. And I appreciate everybody participating in the discussion tonight, and appreciate Mr. Hemney being here. I know that he's been out for a while, so appreciate you being back, RJ. And we look forward to seeing everybody next month. Are there any questions for Mr. Rhodes from the board?
I just wanted to, I want to thank y'all because I know Mr. Rose has been calling and checking on me and family. I appreciate you guys keeping us in your prayers, and also appreciate all the good work you guys did while in my absence. And now I'm back. I'm in full flavor.
All right.
Thank you, RJ.
Yes, sir.
So if there's no other business, I'll adjourn the meeting with voice acclamation.
So move it.
Wow.
All right. Everybody, it sounds like they were in agreement with adjourning.
Yeah, stay safe.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Mr. Rose, we got it fixed.
I see that. Congratulations. Good to have you online.
Yeah, it was what you call it? It was disabled.
Okay.
Okay. So that's
Well,
all.
you know what to do next time. We look forward to having you back each time now, RJ.